Call of Duty Zombies has been out for almost 20 years, meaning we have a very long history with this mode, and today I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to be ranking every single Zombies map in history from worst to best. This includes non-Treyarch maps and also stuff like the Chronicles remakes. Before we get ahead of ourselves though, let's back up a bit. Call of Duty Zombies has been in my life for longer than it hasn't been. I've been playing zombies as long as I can remember, essentially, and this has been such a cornerstone of my development, and I've had countless hours of experience with all of these maps, all of these games, and I've never actually sat down and just tried to rank every map worst to best. That can be a little bit difficult because Call of Duty Zombies has evolved so much as an experience over the years that they're not necessarily easy to compare to one another side by side, although I'm going to try to do my best to do so. We've had countless games, different developers working on this mode, and plenty of maps and experiences to talk about over the long history of Call of Duty Zombies, and today we're going to try to encapsulate that all into one video. The parameters I'm going to use to rank these maps is mostly gameplay-oriented stuff. It's going to be, how tight the design is. That includes its Easter egg, stuff like replayability, and how fun the map to play is. Going to put a lot of value on craftsmanship and innovation and just unique game design that you don't really see anywhere else. And at the end of the day, this is going to be my opinion, this is my list, and if you disagree with me at any point, please feel welcome to make your own video. It's going to be a long one though, so get a drink and get a snack, all that good stuff, and also, don't forget to subscribe. The worst zombies map of all time is going to be Der Anfang from Call of Duty Vanguard. Actually, hang on a second, more like Der Unfun, am I right, fellas? But seriously, this is the worst experience in Call of Duty Zombies, period. We don't even have to talk about the state of the map when it launched. Like, that speaks for itself. The game was literally not done. There was no pack-punch camos, no wonder weapons, like it was seriously not completed already. But to make matters worse, you can tell when you watched interviews with the developers of this mode and map specifically that they just fundamentally misunderstood what Call of Duty Zombies is. I don't know if they were trying to innovate on the formula that Outbreak brought to the table in Cold War the year before. I really don't know. I just cannot for the life of me understand what may have been running through their head when developing this. This had a 2-day lifespan. After people played it once, they realized they were done with it, and there was nothing to do on it. They were going to update it continually. That never really happened. I have nothing nice to say about Der Anfang. It genuinely sucks. Vanguard going 2 for 2 here. Next is going to be Terra Maledicta, which is the second map to release in Vanguard. If you've never played this, number one, I'm not surprised, but you're not missing anything. This is the same exact formula as Der Anfang. Like, there's almost no difference. This is some, I don't know, multiplayer map, or it's part of Vanguard somehow. It's not really an original Zombies map, and they doubled down on the formula that Der Anfang had. They tried to innovate a little bit with some slightly new, enemy types and so on, but it's really not much better at all. They tried to do a minor little Easter egg, but it's nothing special. It has the same exact objective-based formula as Der Anfang did without making any of the objectives fun or interesting at all. And there's not really any rewards that are worth talking about either. There's literally nothing going for either of these two maps. And again, I don't know how they fundamentally misunderstood zombies this hard. It was a weird time, man, and it's so strange to see that this was an era that we had at one point. Moving on over to Call of Duty World War II. This is going to be the Tortured Path, which was the third DLC in that game, and this is so bad. Number one, it wasn't even really supposed to exist from my understanding. They had a lot of mishap going on at the studio and had to get some kind of zombies experience out, so this ended up really getting cobbled together, but it's not good. I have referred to it before as basically the version 1 of the Outbreak experience, but it's so unbelievably bad, it's hard to even put into words. And it's really not that all objective-based zombie modes are, automatically terrible. I don't believe that for a second, but in this case specifically, it certainly is. This is horrendous. Not only is the map not very long, in terms of if you're doing the Easter egg, you can beat it pretty quickly, but the problem is I would rather chew on glass for that same amount of time than actually sit down and play this map. And look, if I'm trying to be very charitable, I can kind of see the vision of maybe what they were going for. I can see a lot of the components, and if they came together in a harmonious way, it could be a ton of fun. The Tortured Path is unique because it's built on 3 different survival maps that you can play them through like sequentially, or you can play them as standalone survival experiences, which aren't, you know, too memorable on their own. There's really nothing special about those. They feel very lackluster, and they're just very okay. But, you know, as an entire experience, I think it's one of the worst in Call of Duty Zombies, and certainly by far the worst in Call of Duty World War II. Taking the next spot is going to be our first appearance of an Exo Zombies map. This is Infection. This is DLC 1 of that game, and surprisingly, it's by far the worst. Unfortunately, Exo Zombies isn't my favorite overall, but Infection is absolutely bottom of the barrel. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of fun and really charming things about Infection. I think a lot of the tone and atmosphere of this is really goofy and silly, and it just feels fun. I like a lot of that stuff, but the problem is some of the design choices genuinely, like, I just can't wrap my head around why they would do this. There are sections of the map, once you get to a certain round, that will just physically shut down. Like, whole areas of the map will be unplayable. It kind of has that Der Riese formula where you have a central hub and then a couple of different offshoots of the map, and every so often those offshoots will be, you know, surrounded by this toxic gas for an entire round, and you just can't interact with that part of the map. This makes doing the Easter egg an absolute nightmare if something you need to do is in that shutdown part of the map. It's just baffling. I just always felt like Infection is the biggest dice roll of any Zombies map, of whether you're going to have a good time, if things are going to go your way or not. It can be a pretty moderately okay, or even a, dare I say it, fun time if things go well and go your way for reasons that are completely outside of your control, or it can be literally the worst experience of your life. There's pretty much no in between, but again, it's not really up to you if you have a good time on this map or not. It's really up to the universe, and I don't like that. It's not very fun to me, and Infection is very low tier. Moving on to Vanguard map number 3, we have the Archon, and this one is, it's funny, fellas, because again, the map is no different than Terra Maledicta. They literally re-released the same map, put a green filter into the air to make the tint look a little bit different, but it's by and large the same map, and the only difference is it actually has a boss fight, and for a Zombies boss fight, it's pretty good. It's definitely not the best we've ever seen, but in terms of Vanguard standards, like, I'm actually impressed. It's pretty sick. Now, it's by no means the best mechanical boss we've ever seen or anything remotely like that, but it feels very much like Beast from Beyond, where that map sucks, but they clearly made it with just the boss fight in mind. That was where all of the development time and money and all the resources went into. Very much similar for that thing. So not much to say about the actual map itself, but the boss fight is the most memorable part of it, even if it isn't my favorite of all time. It is impressive that they managed to get something this good into an utter failure of a game, but the Archon is still pretty low tier for me, and I don't really enjoy it a whole bunch. Coming up after that is going to be the Darkest Shore. This is one of the DLC maps in Call of Duty World War II, and I'm not sure exactly what it is. I don't know what to pin it on, but playing the Darkest Shore just makes me miserable. This map is not fun at all, even though it does have a couple of neat things going for it. I think the Easter egg is fairly interesting, even though it's not the best designed. I don't really care for the boss fight either, but the one thing I will give the Darkest Shore, even though it doesn't have many redeeming qualities, I think it nails the atmosphere of the map, which feels on this very lonely island, and you can kind of get that sensation whenever playing that. It's not a great sensation to have, but in terms of the atmosphere they're trying to strike, I think it does capture that. They really wanted to play up the horror aspect of the early World War II maps, and I'm not really sure why they dropped that tone and feel later on as the DLCs progressed. I'm not entirely sure why, but I think the Darkest Shore probably captures that the most. I just think World War II was so caught up in trying to emulate Treyarch, and they were trying to be Black Ops 3 that they didn't really give themselves enough creative room to, you know, actually do something unique themselves. There were attempts made, but I just think World War II as an overall experience is very forgettable, and I tend to think the Darkest Shore is not quite as bad as the Tortured Path, but it's really one of the lower end maps in the game overall. Up next, we have Descent from Exo Zombies, an interesting pick, and contrary to what Noah J will tell you, this is not a top 5 Zombies map of all time. I wasn't really sure where to put this on the list. I had a hard time placing this, but I ultimately ended up settling on pretty low tier, despite the fact that I think Descent has some cool stuff going on. I absolutely love the setting of where this takes place. You have this underwater Atlas base, and the thing is, the environment genuinely plays a role in the mechanics of the game, especially the Easter egg. You end up going out into the water in these mech suits at one point, and I think they have incredibly fun ideas given the actual unique setting of this. I didn't love the fact that Exo Zombies was all in like these Atlas facilities, but they found a way to make that interesting, and it actually is the first ever Zombies map to have a proper boss fight. That would end up being a groundbreaking innovation for the mode. I mean, practically every Zombies map from that point on would feature a boss fight at the end of its Easter egg, and most of that was inspired from what they did in Descent. Now, there are serious design flaws with this map. Undoubtedly, there are some real holes in the experience that I cannot overlook. It's not a perfect map by any means. Is it unique? For sure. Does it have a ton of problems? Definitely yes as well. Admittedly, a lot of those are just problems with the mechanics of Exo Zombies itself, and maybe not a fault of the map specifically, but it does hinder the experience big time in my eyes. Descent is still not an amazing map in the overall grand scheme of things. Coming up next is our first experience from Black Ops 2. This is Bus Depot Survival. Again, this is a weird one. I'm not really sure totally where to put it, and I don't know if I'm satisfied with this placement, but it's just not a fun experience. It's like one of the most forgettable in BO2. Like, when you think of these survival maps, you tend to think of Town or Nuketown or even Farm. Very rarely do you ever see somebody going out of their way to load up the survival version of TranZit, which is just basically the starting area with a mystery box, and that's it. There's no perks on the map. There's not even quick revive. It's basically the Black Ops 2 equivalent of Nacht or Untoten, and that's cool, I guess, but it just doesn't really feel very fun. It's a cool little challenge every now and again, but there's not much to speak on here. It's not a great map. And while we're at it, we should probably just talk about Farm Survival 2, which I like a little bit better, and what's interesting is that it's pretty much the same mechanics, right? It's just survival, but they've made the sandbox on all of these a little bit different so they don't feel the same. So, you know, you think about Bus Depot, there's only a box. There's not even any perks. In Farm, there's a box and perks, but no Pack-a-Punch, and in Town, you have all three of those. And I think that's interesting because they could have just as easily put all perks and Pack-a-Punch into every one of these survival experiences, but they didn't, and they all feel distinct because of that, which is fun. Obviously, there's some I like better than others, but they all feel very different, even though they're just little tiny survival maps. I think that's cool. Next up is going to be Carrier. This is DLC 3 of Advanced Warfare, another Exo Zombies map. And again, also, I do feel this was a difficult one to place because I know I like it better than Descent, but I don't know by how much, and I'm not really sure if that's even saying anything. But Carrier has a couple of fun things going on with it. Despite it being, again, in an Atlas facility, they actually managed to make the setting feel incredibly unique. We've never had a Zombies map on a, cargo ship carrier like this before, and that makes for some very interesting set pieces, some gameplay situations and everything, and they, again, actually take advantage of where it's at, and I think that's fun. If there's anything to complain about, it's the fact that it feels they added features for the sake of it and didn't understand if they would be enjoyable or not. This is the first map, I believe, ever where the enemy can shoot back at you. I'm not talking about the zombies. There are special rounds with, like, Atlas forces that will invade the ship, and they can fire at you in a zombies map, what's supposed to be a PvE mode like this that just didn't really make a whole lot of sense for, what this experience was going for. I think Carrier can be an enjoyable experience, and I think is more consistently fun than something like Infection for sure, but it's still, again, I think it's held back by the fact that it's Exo Zombies. I just don't love this mode overall, and that prevents it from being like an excellent map. Moving on, we have another Call of Duty World War II map, and this is not one of the main ones you think about with the map on disc or even the DLC, but it's its own little dedicated survival map, and Groesten Haus, I have to say, is like, it's okay. Like, I don't love it, but I really don't strongly dislike it either. I think it's fine, and I think there's a lot of different ways you can play this. You can play it straight up not getting any of the mystery box items or getting Pack-a-Punch or even buying any perks, although you do have an option to do a small little Easter egg that will unlock a secret closet. This will give you access to the mystery box, and it's even got a little Easter egg that will allow you to Pack-a-Punch. Again, not the most groundbreaking or innovative zombies experience we've ever had over the years, but I very much find it charming for what it offers and the layers that and different experiences that you can play depending on what you want to do. Not the most memorable thing in the world, admittedly, but Groesten Haus is fine. Next up is going to be a very complicated one. This is the Beast from Beyond from Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, and this is the first IW appearance on the list. This is the final DLC in the game, and it's complicated to rank because I absolutely detest the map itself. I despise it. The fact that cryptids were reintroduced into the game and have the exact same mechanics as zombies, number one, makes no sense and makes for terrible gameplay experiences. So you have a very lackluster looking and feeling map combined with probably the worst boss fight in zombies history, which is the cryptid fight. Obviously, this is just not good, and I don't know if it was intentionally not good as maybe a red herring for something else, but and it depends on whether you include this as part of the Beast from Beyond map or not, but it also houses the worst and best boss fights in Zombies respectively, basically back to back, which is pretty insane if you think about it. If you include Mephistopheles in the overall experience that is Beast from Beyond, then yeah, I think it's gonna turn it up a couple notches and definitely soften out its edges. But if you think that this is so different, it shouldn't be really included in what that map represents and is supposed to be, then I think Beast from Beyond definitely falls by the wayside and is just a poorly designed map overall. It's not great, but it really depends on how you look at it. Coming up next is going to be TranZit on Black Ops 2, and here's the thing, I can see this one being a little bit divisive on where my placement is. Some people are going to regard this as a top tier map because of how fun it can be, and I'm not going to deny that at all. The thing I always talk about with TranZit is I feel it's an incredibly poorly designed map that can be some of the most fun you've ever had. The map is just objectively not well designed. It didn't come out how they wanted. A lot of the features that were intended for this map just simply never made the cut. It's a pretty scuffed map mechanically speaking. It does nothing to hide its blemishes or its shortcomings. That much is obvious, but I truly feel that a lot of the charm and fun in TranZit is baked into its rough edges. And that's been the problem from day one with a TranZit remaster or remake or whatever you want to call it. If they were to re-release this map and very much change a lot of the mechanics and smooth things out and make them more modernized, I feel it would lose a lot of its charm because much of the fun to be had in this map was actually a result of its unrefined nature or its rough edges. You could argue that a remaster of TranZit would be fun in its own right and it would provide a very different experience than what the original did, and I think there's some truth to that. I agree. But simply put, we're never going to have an experience quite like this again because TranZit is an old map and its design is heavily outdated. It was outdated for the time that it released in, and this certainly would not work well with a modern gaming audience, just in the state that it is now. It's just, if Treyarch were to remaster it, it would be modernized to hell. It would be very different looking and feeling. It's just not going to be the same. That's the truth of the situation, and that's just a sort of a case for the time. Like, TranZit was very much a time capsule of how zombie games were being made at that point, and, you know, obviously it had its vision compromised very heavily. It's not a good map. I think we can agree on that, but I would be lying to you if I said that I didn't have some of my most memorable and nostalgic experiences from TranZit. There is a reason it's one of the most iconic maps, despite not being a very good one. So moving on to our next map, we have Outbreak from Exo Zombies. Now, there is another Outbreak, we'll get to that later, but this is specifically the one from Advanced Warfare. So this map, I feel, is quite a special case, and the reason I'm actually saying this is the best Exo Zombies map, it's a difficult choice to put, but I'm gonna say that I prefer Outbreak in Exo Zombies because it feels like a very, you know, let's say consolidated experience where they're not trying to do too much or get too crazy doing a lot of things that don't work. They have a zombies formula that they looked at and said, let's just get that part right. What's really cool is this map was the first time we ever got introduced to having an exo movement in a zombies mode, period. This map also had a main Easter egg with 2 different alternate endings depending on what you do, which was pretty different at the time. It's certainly the most simple of all of the Exo Zombies maps. You know, very easy to understand layout, very quick and simple Easter egg. Like, there's pretty much nothing else going on. But the reason I think I prefer this the most is because, number one, obviously the game didn't release with Exo Zombies. This would actually be introduced as a DLC later, and that was the beginning of the entire mode to begin with, and that was fun. And being their first map, I think they did a good job. I don't think it needed to be anything other than what it is, and it's a fun little survival map with an Easter egg. Moving on to our next map, we have the Shadowed Throne from Call of Duty World War II once again. We are almost out of maps from this game, but the Shadowed Throne is one of the better ones in my opinion. What's interesting is this was supposed to be placed differently in the DLC, meaning it should have came out a little bit sooner, but it had to be pushed back. There were other maps that were made for this game that never came out, and so the Shadowed Throne maybe didn't get quite as much love as it was supposed to, and that's a bit unfortunate. I enjoy the vibe of this map a lot, however, I'm just not really in love with the layout, the overall design of it. I think the Easter egg is fun, like getting all the different melee weapons and how that unlocks like a secret room at the end, and then you go and fight on the boss on the Zeppelin. Like, that's sick. There's a lot of great ideas that are in the Shadowed Throne, and I just felt like it could have taken that next step to really ascend into something great, but it gets held back by, unfortunately, a lot of World War II's clunkier systems and maybe just not quite as much time in the oven as it maybe deserved. The Shadow Throne, I feel like you can tell that Sledgehammer was slowly learning more lessons and getting better at making zombies maps, maybe finding their footing a little bit. It wasn't that giant step in innovation that they would eventually take, but it was a step in the right direction, and had we had maybe more maps with this level of quality or polish going forward, then I think it could have been in a pretty good position. I think the Shadow Throne is pretty, like, I would still say it's lower end, but maybe a middle of the road zombies map, all things considered. Coming up next is going to be Attack of the Radioactive Thing from Infinite Warfare. This is a strange map, bro. I went back and played this and I'm like, damn, did this really come out on the PS4? It looks like legitimately a PS2 game. And I've always had this theory that I'm not sure if this was because of maybe they didn't have the money to make this map look as nice as it could, or if it was a deliberate design choice to make it look a lot more retro to fit the theme of the map itself. I really don't know. Maybe it's a bit of both, but this map is so odd looking. And not only that, but the map layout and design are so unbelievably strange. The old Zombies design philosophy for maps were to have a small and cramped space to make the player feel, you know, a bit snuffed out or overwhelmed. This is not the case. They just give you this big old open beach with plenty of space to run around. It's not really an open world map, you know, it's still like a traditional round-based zombies map, but without that, you know, tight cramping space that you would get in something else. And it just makes for this really weird feeling experience. The Easter egg is strange. It's very like scavenger hunt. You need a PhD in chemistry to be able to interact with this Easter egg. Like, I'm kidding, but like, you know, it's just, it's odd, bro. And I will say the biggest redeeming quality to Attack of the Radioactive Thing, as much as I really hate the map, I gotta admit, it's got one of the best boss fights in Zombies history. Definitely no Mephistopheles, and there are some Treyarch fights that in retrospect I think I like better, but I will say that this is one of the more interesting and complex ones, and I hope that we see something a bit more like this in the future. It's actually a great idea, and they haven't really gone anywhere with it. It's so, you know, disappointing that it's in one of the worst maps in my opinion. Is it a charming map? Yeah, for sure. It's incredibly unique. Is it a good map? I cannot honestly say that. It's just not really for me. I get the tone and style is very special, but I just don't have a lot of fun playing the Zombies map, if I'm being honest. Coming up next, we have Numa from Call of Duty Vanguard, which is the final map in this list that is from Vanguard. It's the best map in the game, even though that's not really saying much. A little bit of fun history about Numa is this was absolutely not in the original plans to be made. Basically, this was the community forced their hand to make something that was a more traditional round-based experience with a proper Easter egg. And for what it's worth, it's pretty good. I don't play it all the time, and I haven't played it in a while, honestly, but every time I sit down and did play it, I'm like, why did Vanguard not start with an experience like this? This clearly worked so much better, and I feel the community would have been much more receptive to something like this, even though it is Numa. It's just got a little, you know, simple Easter egg, but it's actually moderately fun. And again, I don't love Vanguard's mechanics. That is another thing that's holding it back, but for what it's worth, like, it kind of felt a bit like Cold War Zombies, and I'm like, this map and Easter egg should have been in Cold War. It would have hit so much harder, but it's definitely the shining star of Vanguard, even though that isn't really saying a whole lot. It just goes to show how absolutely low the bar was set for the Zombies experience in Vanguard, man. Like, you know, we've been playing Numa for almost 20 years, and this is the most fun you can have in Zombies. Like, that's not really saying a whole lot. And it's like, okay, well, it's fine. The boss is cool. The Easter egg is nice. I just wish we could have started with this, but it is what it is. I don't have the willpower to go and play Vanguard anymore. I just don't care. Moving on to our first Black Ops 4 map on this list is going to be Dead of the Night. This is a map I wish I liked more than I do. Unfortunately, I've given it plenty of chances and many opportunities for it to click with me, and it's just never really grown on me the way that, you know, I'm sure it has for a lot of people. I just don't care for this map for a lot of reasons. I think most of it has to do with the fact that virtually everything that you're going to interact with is just this big, like, collectathon. There are billions of parts to gather, and it's just like, it feels like the zombies being in the map are an afterthought to the fact that you're collecting all of these things and doing these puzzles. And again, there's nothing wrong with puzzles, but it feels like they have completely lost the emphasis of being a zombies map. I always said it before, but it's like Dead of the Night feels like a Nancy Drew puzzle game more than it does a Call of Duty Zombies map. And that's fine. I'm sure there are plenty of people that prefer that style. I just tend to like maps that are a lot more like just, you know, gameplay oriented. I don't like the collectathon stuff. It's just not really my thing. I will admit that the atmosphere of Dead of the Night is incredibly unique. The Easter egg is not my favorite, and the boss fight is just mediocre in my opinion. So there isn't really anything to quite grab me and make this map be, you know, high tier for me. It's just one of the lower end ones that I've really tried to grow and love, but it's just not really clicked for me. It's for sure way better than every other map we've discussed on this list up to this point, but it's certainly no top 10 zombies map or anything like that. Coming up after that is going to be our first Black Ops 3 map on this list, and this is going to be Nacht and Toten from Chronicles. And so let's put aside what Chronicles is as a DLC and what it did for the community. Obviously, all of that was amazing, and I'm not complaining at all that we have this available on BO3. But what I will say is that Black Ops 3's mechanics and the choices that they made to give Nacht and Toten completely remove the original appeal of that map, and I think that this was the most like jarring juxtaposition of modern game mechanics into an old map. What you're going to notice is I think that Black Ops 3's systems start to work incrementally better in the Chronicles maps as time would go on. So for example, Nacht and Toten works the worst with BO3's mechanics, where Origins is, you know, a lot newer by comparison and works a lot better with Black Ops 3 systems. I don't think that's really a controversial statement, but you can tell that the addition of all of these perks, the ability to use Gobblegum and thus Pack-a-Punch in Nacht and Toten, and just the way that it's designed in this particular game, it's just not really very fun. There are ways to play it that can make Nacht and Toten fun, you know, not using any perks and stuff like that can make it more enjoyable, but yeah, just Black Ops 3 systems really are at odds with what Nacht and Toten originally in World at War was trying to accomplish, and I think that's made no clearer here, and I find Nacht on BO3 incredibly boring personally. Moving on to our next map, we have Alpha Omega in Black Ops 4, which unfortunately is a map that I know had to be heavily compromised from its vision, and you can clearly tell where it had to cut corners, which is sad because I think given its full potential, this could have been a seriously special map. In terms of Treyarch's catalog, this would have been one that stands out. It is a Nuketown remaster, but I use that term very loosely. It hardly plays like Nuketown at all, other than just being in the same setting. You have access to this whole underground area, and there are a lot of neat and charming things about Alpha Omega, and the boss fight is pretty interesting, even though it's not really my favorite. However, there are also a lot of flaws with Alpha Omega and things that significantly hold the experience back from being great and or even just like, I would say, average or good. In my eyes, the map would need to undergo significant reworks in order for it to ascend into something truly great. I think it's incredibly forgettable and mediocre as a Black Ops 4 Zombies map, and I think that's not entirely their fault. I do believe that this was due to slashed budgets and everything. Like, they had to make the best of what they could. You can tell they were struggling with their budget here because when you look at the cutscene of the map, you're like, yeah, I mean, I can see what's going on here, but you know, all things considered, Alpha Omega is not the bottom of the barrel in the Zombies experience overall, but it's definitely still on the like lower middle end. Staying on this game, coming up next, we have Voyage of Despair on Black Ops 4, and the thing is, before Voyage released, I genuinely thought this was going to be my favorite Zombies map of all time. Just the setting and what we knew about it looked absolutely sick, and it fell so far from being what I expected that it's just rather disappointing. I think one of the many flaws with the Voyage of Despair is the fact that they went for an ultra-realistic layout and tried to recreate the Titanic, which, you know, kudos to them for creating something so incredibly real that way, but that just doesn't always make for cohesive game design, let alone a good Zombies map. Voyage of Despair is heavily flawed. I don't particularly like its Easter egg. There's many things that I just don't care for. I will say the boss battle is one of the best in Zombies, and, you know, bosses have never been Treyarch's strong suit, in my opinion anyways, but Voyage of Despair is one of the ones that break that mold. When I play Voyage now, I can certainly see the vision of, I think, what they wanted to encapsulate. For all of the upsides and positives and unique features that Voyage does bring to the table, it also has just as many, if not more, glaring flaws that completely hold the experience back. There's just far too many holes in it for me to really consider it a top-tier map, even though it has the potential to be that. It certainly did. Moving on to our next map, we have Firebase Z on Cold War Zombies. Now, here's the thing. I don't know know if any Cold War map is outright bad. And the reason for that is they had the same exact formula for every single map, and it's a formula that worked. With that in mind, I don't think any Cold War map also ascended truly into something great. I feel like the batting average for all of them was pretty strong, but they're all just like very consistently average, you know, and I think Firebase Z completely encapsulates that, even though I still feel it's on the lower end in Cold War's offering personally. Firebase Z has strengths in the fact that I think it's a very easy map to pick up and play, and there's a lot of fun gameplay mechanics to engage in. The Easter egg is pretty mild, you know, there's not really much to say there. The boss fight's really boring, and there's not a whole lot of like atmosphere going on, and it's very unmemorable in that sense too. There's nothing I can point at in Firebase Z that I outright just like despise, that I feel that strongly about, but I just feel very like apathetic or despondent to it. I just don't really care for this map. Coming up next is going to be the Frozen Dawn from Call of Duty World War II, which at that point in the season I was a little bit checked out from, but as I go back and play the map now, and even at the time, I was starting to realize that this feels like Sledgehammer is finally starting to get it. It looks like they're able to find their footing to some degree, and I think number one, its atmosphere is impeccable. It's one of my favorite settings for a zombies map ever. I think it's great in that way. The Wonder Weapon formula is very well thought out here, and you have some unique stuff going on with Easter egg steps. I love it. I think the quest is actually genuinely fun, and not to mention, it's got a pretty damn good boss fight. I will admit, it's has one of my favorite zombies bosses in history. Unfortunately, though, there's a lot of stuff about the Frozen Dawn that I strongly dislike as well, so it's a bit of a mixed bag. It kind of ends up balancing itself out a little bit, and is just a middle-of-the-road zombies experience. If it didn't have the stellar boss fight that it does, it would fall way lower on the ladder for me, definitely, but I think it's serviceable, it's playable, and it's fun. It's one of the strongest offerings in World War II, but compared to the rest of Call of Duty Zombies as a brand, I don't think it really holds a candle to some of the best in the business, but it's certainly memorable, and that's something at least. Coming up next, I think we are officially leaving the lower tier zombies maps, or just even lower middle end. We are actually directly in the middle now, and this is going to be probably the one that encapsulates that the most. The definition of mediocre, in my opinion, is going to be Numa from World at War. It's actually the first World at War map on this list, and it's my least favorite in the game, and you might be wondering, well, like, why is that? I mean, Numa did innovate in some ways. You had the perks that would spawn in random places, the introduction of special enemies that were the Hellhounds, and that's cool and everything, but it's not volume of features for me that really can, you know, take something up a notch. For me, it's really about the value you get out of those new added features, and I think the appeal to Nacht and Toten, and even Verruckt by extension, was how cramped and like hectic of an experience that provided. At least in those early days, that was the only point to playing zombies, was just to, you know, like hold out with your friends and survive. And Numa still has that gameplay loop, but making the level a lot more open, it lost some of that energy I felt that those older two maps had. And that's not to say that it wouldn't recapture that in some ways, but I just find Numa in retrospect to be the most boring map on World at War. And you may notice that I'm not ranking the BO1 versions of these maps, because those are simply ports. They're not really remasters. You just have BO1's weapons, and they're not much different. However, Numa is incredibly broken on World at War. It's obviously very easy to exploit and get dummy high rounds, but it's fine. It's just not one of the better maps in Treyarch's lineup. Coming up next is going to seem like a hard shift from the previous map, and it maybe kind of is, but this is Rave in the Redwoods from Infinite Warfare, perhaps one of the most unique maps in Zombies. Again, IW definitely killed it when it comes to overall atmosphere and personality, and Rave in the Redwoods is no exception. You're in literally a like slasher horror movie setting, and that can make for some incredibly interesting gameplay experiences that they really do capitalize on. You have these wonder weapons that are elemental crossbows, which is really fun. You can go into this Rave mode that looks absolutely sick, and having Kevin Smith, I think, was the perfect choice for the celebrity of the map. That being said, Rave in the Redwoods is still certainly flawed, and it's no perfect zombies map. There's a lot that I would do differently if I were in charge of designing this, but this was also one of the moments when I started to realize that in this era, I thought that Infinity Ward was really good at designing boss fights. This was absolutely their strong suit, and I was thinking about, like, if Treyarch had made like a map itself and then designed the Easter egg and then gave IW the design for the boss fight, we could have something absolutely special on our hands, because they always had something very different going on in each individual boss encounter. It wasn't just like a 3-phase shoot the guy kind of boss fight. There was a lot more going on there, and Rave in the Redwoods boss fight specifically is one of the, shining gems about the map in my eyes. Without trying to give you tonal whiplash, going all the way back to World at War again is going to be Nacht and Toten, and I alluded to it earlier, but the reason I tend to prefer Nacht and Toten over Numa is just for the experience that it provided. I think that even though, yes, Numa had more things going on, it was a bit more complex, I think that the experience that Nacht and Toten was absolutely perfect for what it was trying to be, which was literally just a little simple survival experience with not much else going on. I think the map being somewhat more claustrophobic and hectic in the way that it was provided this kind of uneasiness that I'm not sure Numa captured in the same way. I think that's largely thanks just to the way the zombies work and the map design itself. You never feel quite comfortable, even when you're upstairs camping or something like that. You never get a sense that you've mastered your surroundings. You always feel a little bit on the back foot at a disadvantage, and you don't have anything to really help you out. There's no perks. You've got the mystery box, obviously, and then you have that one really cool thing in there, which is the ray gun that was just like, out of this world. It's very different to all the other weapons, and everybody's yearning for that. It was such an incredibly interesting experience, and you can call that nostalgia or whatever, but I think Nacht and Toten, even though it's incredibly bare bones and simple, is still a ton of fun. Another complete tonal whiplash heading over to Black Ops 4, we have Toten, and you know what? I'm just going to admit it. This is a map that has grown on me quite a lot since the last time I ranked zombies maps. However, that in mind, I still am not going to say that's one of my favorite or even what I would consider to be a very, very good map. I think it's serviceable and it's better than I originally ranked it as, but it's still, significantly flawed, and it has the Alpha Omega problem where not only is it Call of the Dead only in setting, it has nothing to do with those mechanics or anything, so it feels a little bit pointless in that regard. But also, this is the final map in what was the traditional Ether storyline. That clearly wasn't meant to be the case. This was obviously not how Zombies was envisioned to end, and I think for what it's worth, Toten does have a lot of fun, charming things, and it's obviously in an impactful map because of where it's placed in the zombie storyline. But just looking at it on its own, I cannot say that Toten is a flawless experience, and I think it has a lot of room for improvement. It has some of my favorite things in Zombies, as well as some of my least favorite things in Zombies ever. Despite the fact that this map has indeed grown on me significantly over the years, it just makes it even that much more painful when you realize that that wasn't supposed to be how Zombies was going to end, and their original plan for the ending, I'm sure, would have been absolutely stellar given what Toten ended up being. Moving on to our next one is a little bit difficult to rank because it's not really a map. I mean, this is Outbreak in Cold War Zombies, and I'm just going to come out and say it. I am an Outbreak enjoyer, and while it's not my favorite experience in the entire world, I felt like it was a much needed refresher, and it took many of the most fun things that you can do in a traditional zombies map and put it in this very unique blender that was something that was incredibly new to the palette. Outbreak has a lot of room for improvement, and I felt that from the very beginning. They were also able to pull off something that I felt like would have been impossible. They managed to sort of combine the open world experience and still keep it more or less round based, and I thought that that was something so strange that they were able to do. And you may or may not know this, but Outbreak was actually supposed to be an extraction mode like MWZ is now. Those were toying with a lot of the same ideas, and I feel like if they were actually able to pull off the extraction mechanics like they wanted to, they would probably make this so it wasn't really a round-based experience. They would get rid of that counter entirely, which would completely change the mode. But honestly, I really like Outbreak as an experience. I think the core gameplay is awesome, and being able to make this more free-form sandbox version of Zombies while still keeping the round-based feel was an impressive feat that I will definitely give Treyarch props for. I can imagine they're going to bring this mode back in some capacity in the next game, but we're going to have to wait and see on that, but I really do like it. Moving on, we have Shaolin Shuffle from Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, and this is definitely one of the better Zombies maps in IW. This is where I felt like they had probably the most dialed in map design other than Zombies in Spaceland, which we'll get to later, but I feel like they had a good layout and flow with this. I think the Easter egg is very Treyarch feeling, and those of you who have played it it will sort of understand what I mean by that. I think Shaolin Shuffle is the most Treyarch feeling IW map. I think that's a huge compliment. It's got all of the, mechanical polish that you would expect from a Treyarch map, with all of the personality oozing from it that you would expect IW to pull off. It's this really great blend of, these two things coming together that make for an absolutely unforgettable experience. Admittedly, there's some like Easter egg steps that I don't love in Shaolin Shuffle, and there are some elements that aren't my favorite. Mostly, the Kung Fu cheese are kind of cool, but I feel they're significantly underutilized in this map, and the 4 Wonder Weapon formula I think was at its weakest here. But I mean, still, I have a lot of praise for Shaolin Shuffle, and I don't have a whole lot of negative to say about it. The boss fight's also pretty damn fun as well, and Shaolin Shuffle is an overall very good map. Moving back over to Black Ops 2, we have Die Rise, and I remember the day this map came out, I was thinking about it all day at school. I had detention that day, and as I was leaving and walking back to my friend's house, this was the only thing on my mind, and I had no idea how much this map would like literally change my life, the direction of zombies and everything, and standing on its own 2 feet, certainly not the best zombies map ever made. This is clearly one of those Jimmy Zielinski maps where he had a much more chaotic level design than something like Jason Blundell that would take over later and make things like Mob of the Dead or Origins, and there are a lot of things to like about both TranZit and Die Rise and their design philosophies, and I think this makes for an incredibly fun map. This is one of those few older ones that have not been remastered in any capacity, or at least officially that is. And I just know if that were the case, and if it did get remastered, it would have the same fate as a TranZit one, where a lot of the rough edges would be inevitably smoothened out, and I think that would reduce a lot of its charm that the original experience has. I'm completely okay with Die Rise never getting a remaster, because while it's by no means a mechanically perfect map, there are so many flaws to, the way that this is designed. I think that what it provides is something that's lightning in a bottle and can frankly never be replicated. I think a remaster would go a long way in moderning up the game design itself, but I do think it would feel much different. You could never recreate that feeling again. Moving right along to our next map, we have Forsaken in Cold War Zombies, which was the final map to release for that game. And this is a pretty unique case because I feel Forsaken is not like any other Zombies map. It's very distinct, and that's for good and bad reasons. I think that the layout of this map is genuinely really bad. I don't think the actual map itself is all that memorable. It essentially uses 90% of the assets from the red light, green light mission in Cold War's campaign, with honestly very little changes to the actual layout. We're no strangers to having reused assets from the campaign in Zombies, but usually they're rearranged in a way that make them unique for that mode. That's not really the case here, or at least it doesn't feel like it. Admittedly though, it has a cool wonder weapon, it's got a great boss fight, and I actually happen to like the Easter egg quite a bit. Important to note, this is the map in Cold War where I felt like Treyarch really found their footing with side Easter eggs. It has some of the best that have ever been present in Zombies history, and it's a bit of a shame because it seems at points it comes at the cost of having a great main Easter egg, and if every single map in Cold War had the depth and complexity and the just uniqueness of the side Easter eggs that Forsaken contains, it could have been in a really good position. It seems like they figured it out with this map, but by that point it was already the end of the season. So hopefully in their next game they're able to take what they learned from this map and, present that going forward. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, we have let me see if we can do this. The best Zombies map of all time. Kino or Toten Black Ops 1. Damn, I kind of killed that. Anyways, on a more serious note, it's not the best Zombies map ever made. It's Kino or Toten on BO1. You've played it, you love it, it's a Zombies map that shares much more DNA with everything in World at War, obviously because it was supposed to be on that game. While I do think, however, this was a good move to have in Black Ops 1 because it's the easiest entry point into the mode. Specifically, it gives you all of the, basic foundations that you'll need to interact with the rest of BO1, as the maps would get much more complex from here on out. But Kino or Toten is very easy to pick up and play, yet still has a pretty high skill ceiling, but it gives you all of the tools that you'll need to take on the rest of the DLC season. And it's very rare for a Zombies map in a game to be able to do that. And Kino or Toten being the map on disc was probably an accident because, they didn't finish it for its original game, but it ended up being one of the best moves ever for Zombies as a franchise. The thing is, Kino or Toten's beauty is in its simplicity. There's no main Easter egg, although there are, a couple side ones ones here and there. Getting Pack-a-Punch is relatively straightforward, and the gameplay loop announces itself and makes itself obvious right away. It's a map that you can play over and over again and still get something new out of the experience. One of the best co-op maps to play with your friends, which is why so many people have great memories on it here too. It's the Zombies formula that, was a little bit innovative for what it was, based what they had in World at War, but it didn't go so far off the rails where it was overwhelming or too complex and off-putting for somebody who's just getting started. It didn't gatekeep the mode in general. In fact, it was a very welcoming experience, I'd argue, even more so than almost any map on disc Treyarch has ever done. Moving on to our next map, but still talking about maps on disc, we have our last map from World War II, which is going to be the Final Reich. And I think this is the best map in the game for a lot of reasons. I could go on for hours about why I like the atmosphere, the design, the main quest, the wonder weapons, etc. But I think the most important thing to take away from the Final Reich was it felt, different enough and distinct enough in the beginning, but also it did one of the smartest things I've ever seen a Zombies map do, which have not really been iterated on since. They had a main quest, which is basically like an Easter egg where it tells you what to do more or less. You have this journal, and then they have a hardcore Easter egg, which it does not give you any hints. It's like more of a traditional, puzzle to solve and in any other Zombies map. And you have these two different experiences that will get you into doing Easter eggs, and I think that was great to have both of these experiences available in a map. Sadly, they've never done it since then, and even though I don't think the execution in the Final Reich of this concept was perfect, I would absolutely love to see round-based Zombies maps come out where they have a more on-the-rails like quest for the map, and then they have a proper Easter egg. That would be absolutely amazing, and I think would fundamentally take Zombies to the next level. The Final Reich tried it, and maybe it stumbled in a few areas, but I give them props all day for having that idea, and I think it's overall just a pretty solid map. Coming up next is going to be a map on Black Ops 4, and admittedly, I don't have as much to say about this one as some others, but Classified is an interesting case of a Zombies map remaster to where they've basically remade the concepts that made the original so special. We'll get to 5 later, but I do think Classified is the somewhat more lackluster experience. Even though there is technically more to do, there's actually a few Easter eggs, and there's even a whole Area 51 for Pack-a-Punch on here, but it removes a lot of the fun things that made 5 stand out on its own. And, one of those being the actual Pentagon Thief is no longer present in Classified. The teleporters do not randomly send you somewhere anymore, which you could argue is just good from a gameplay perspective, but it removes a lot of the, random chaotic energy that 5 originally had. I still feel that to this day. And I also just think the player systems of Black Ops 4, the specialist weapon, elixirs, shield, all that stuff, it definitely makes you feel much more safe and less vulnerable than 5 was able to make you feel. It's that certain indescribable quality that I think is lost in Classified. Even though it is technically the same map, they don't feel the same at all. And I think it's fine. It's a cool little survival map. Practically the only, let's say, casual map that you can just jump on and play in BO4, really. But it does its job okay, and I think it's still a decent map, just not my favorite. Up next is a strange one, and again, I'm not totally satisfied with maybe where I've put it. It's difficult to fit with the rest of this list, but I've got to put it somewhere. So I'm going to say Modern Warfare Zombies is still up here in my, basically middle of the pack Zombies experience. It's not really one map. I mean, it is and it's not. You have these Dark Ether rifts that are their own exclusive thing, but anybody who's played Modern Warfare 3 Zombies knows that this is essentially the DMZ formula with zombies included. It's actually not much like Outbreak at all, because that experience was do one objective, go to a new map as it gets harder and harder. This is based on essentially the location that you're in the map dictates how difficult the enemies are, and it is a true extraction mode. I think for that reason alone, it's at least unique. They've done something quite different with zombies, which is, I think you could give it some credit where it's due, but, this formula certainly isn't for everybody, and I also think it's absolutely no replacement for a round-based zombies experience. But the thing above all else, even though it is an experimental mode, and I'm willing to accept that, you can tell, as opposed to a round-based zombies map, and especially a lot of the old classics, you can just feel that this mode is, let's say, engineered for player optimization instead of player satisfaction, where it's like the design philosophy of an old round-based map is, let's just make a really cool experience for the player, and, we're not really concerned with how much they're playing it. You can tell this mode is basically trying to keep you on the chain. They want you coming back day after day, getting your schematics, cooling them down, replaying it again, and that's fine or whatever, but it just doesn't feel like the same amount of attention and love was put into just making a really unforgettable unforgettable zombies mode. It's like they reused what they had to kind of cobble something together that's workable, and it was about that, you know. And for what it's worth, I think MWZ can be a lot of fun in many ways, but it has severe holes in it as well, and it's no replacement for round-based zombies. Jumping all the way back in time to World at War, we have Verruckt, which is not the most complex map ever. You know, it's essentially the same gameplay loop as Nacht and Toten, with one or two big innovations, which was the addition of perks, which, you know, fundamentally would never leave zombies from that point out, and also have the introduction of traps, and even a brand new wonder weapon. Verruckt, I think, is just the Nacht and Toten gameplay loop turned up to 11, and that's even made more clear by the fact that super sprinters are a thing only in World at War. They would actually get rid of them in the BO1 port, but these were zombies that were much faster than the player, and while these were, I would say, a bit unfair in retrospect, it was one of those things that added to the intensity of how this map felt. And still, to this day, in 2024, Verruckt has one of the most unsettling atmospheres in zombies. I think a lot of that has to do with the nature of, you know, the untextured graphics and the low quality textures we had at the time. For some reason, I find older games like this, they tend to be much more creepy than brand new games with all of these like great effects and HD textures. Even if they're trying to create a scary atmosphere, it's something about the stripped down visuals that really make Verruckt feel uncanny. I don't know what it is, but it's incredibly unsettling to play, even still, and I think they really struck lightning in a bottle with its atmosphere alone. Once you play it, it will never leave you, and while I would critique a lot of things about Verruckt's gameplay, you know, the balance isn't perfect, I think it's a map that's genuinely unforgettable for so many reasons. Up next, moving back over to Black Ops 1, we have its first DLC map ever, Ascension, which is a very special one because this is the zombies map that technically can be credited for the birth of the main Easter egg. We've had other zombies maps like Riese where you've had small little things you can do like the hide and seek quest and stuff, but nothing to this grand scale or effect where you're actually doing a proper quest with these like substantial, very intricate steps, and they would only get more complex as zombies would go on, but Ascension can be rightfully credited with the birth of that entire concept, which has carried zombies as a mode for pretty much over a decade now. Now, the setting of Ascension takes place in this Soviet Cosmodrome facility, which you could make the argument that it is a reused campaign asset, which would be correct. It is in the campaign, but they've reorganized the ingredients of this map to be entirely unique for the zombies mode, and that was one of those things that you can tell they put a lot of passion into making feel very special, and it absolutely does. Ascension is one of the more memorable maps in zombies history. It may not be iconic as something like Kino or Toten, or hell, even TranZit on Black Ops 2, but I think basically everybody who played BO1 will remember Ascension for some kind of reason. Its unique setting, its Easter egg, its new gameplay features and perks and so on, but sadly, it's not all perfect at Ascension. It's got one of the worst special rounds, I think, in the Zombies franchise. You know, these space monkeys come down from these shuttles and they go and attack your perks. I think they're really fun from a conceptual perspective, and it adds a lot of personality to the mode, no doubt. They're very unique at the time, but just from a pure gameplay perspective, they're basically impossible to deal with solo. You're not even really able to do this Easter egg solo anyways. It wasn't designed for that, but I think the monkeys outside of the Chronicles remake are probably one of the worst additions to this map. If they had been implemented a little bit differently, I think I would have been okay with them, but this is sadly one of the biggest weights around the ankle of Ascension, and that prevents it from being one of the greatest of all time, in my opinion. Coming up next, though, we have Numa from Zombies Chronicles, and again, these ones are a bit difficult to find where I really want to put them in the ranking, but I know I at least prefer this to the World at War version, and I would say even by extension the BO1 version, even though we're not exactly ranking that one, but BO3 Chronicles gets a lot right, and even though I said most of the World at War maps feel very weird having Black Ops 3 modern systems such as perks, gobblegums, pack-a-punch, etc., I think this map does okay with it, because number one, World at War, Numa is incredibly easy to manipulate and just break the map. You can break the map, but in a different way in Chronicles, but I just find it to be overall much more interesting. There's not really anything new added in terms of major Easter eggs or, you know, anything like that, but I don't know, I at least find it much more fun than Chronicles Nacht and Toten, and it works fine here. I think it looks great, and it's a very fun gameplay experience, and pretty fun to play co-op as well. Now, up after that, we have BO2's very own Town. This is a quite small survival experience, and fellas, honestly, I don't have a ton to say about Town that needs to be said. I feel this map very much speaks speaks for itself. It's just a very classic survival map. You've got all your perks, mystery box, pack-a-punch, no Easter eggs or anything crazy like that. You just literally load into the map, shoot zombies, and survive as long as you can. That being said, there is still some depth to how town plays. There's a couple of different viable strategies that you can learn and get good at, and it still has, you know, a skill ceiling despite being a very simple premise. And even though the map wasn't necessarily catered towards being a survival experience, it's merely a small subset of TranZit, I think it ended up working out perfectly, and town is probably still, to this date, one of the best survival experiences that seem simple on paper, but have a fair amount of depth, and it's just genuinely a lot of fun. Coming up next is, ironically, the reason why town exists, and I mean that literally. This is Moon from BO1, a damn good map, even though it was the final one in Black Ops 1. Fun fact for you, Moon was not supposed to exist. The idea for DLC 4 originally was going to be a map set in Paris. This is what Jimmy Zielinski was working on, and they felt that that really wasn't taking it far enough, so they wanted to up the stakes for the ending of the game. And I think taking it to the moon and then setting up everything that would happen in Black Ops 2 was ultimately for the better, but this was not the original plan, and I think that that shows in its design somewhat. I think Moon is a heavily flawed map. Its layout and map flow is very clunky, and I'll say that with my whole chest. I don't love the way that you have to pick between your spacesuit and the hacker. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, and I really don't think it would have changed the game all that much if you can use both. It's little things like that. These new mechanics that they would introduce, I think, had a lot of room for refinement. However, even with that in mind, I still think Moon gets a lot right. I think it takes the concept of main Easter egg at the time for Black Ops 1 and took it to a whole new level. This really has more DNA with the BO2 map than it does Black Ops 1. You can tell they were starting to play with many of these ideas that would fully be fleshed out in BO2, and the innovation was at an all-time high here. And with a lot of innovation is going to come a lot of mistakes. There's no doubt about that. Moon had a lot of room for improvement, and some of those mistakes would actually be rectified in the Chronicles remasters, but I cannot understate what Moon did for zombies as a franchise and really set them up well to continue their momentum in Black Ops 2. They set themselves up as a brand in BO1, and I think Moon completely solidified them in the public eye here. Next, we actually have another DLC 4 map, and this is going to be Revelations on Black Ops 3. Unfortunately, this is not the crescendo to what I'm going to argue is the greatest zombies experience ever. Revelations is a good map, but I don't think it's the map that everybody was hoping or wishing for it to be. Part of that problem was admittedly the unbelievably high expectations we probably had during the season of Black Ops 3. I mean, we were getting hit with stuff like Shadows of Evil, Der Eisendrache back to back, arguably the greatest maps ever made, and Revelations having to cap all this off and be like this end-all be-all experience, I'm sure was a lot of pressure. But even then, there are a lot of critiques that I have about the map, particularly in the main quest design. I think that the way this Easter egg is set up, it's got the DNA and blueprints of a BO4 map with, you know, seemingly very illogical steps and things that just don't make any sense. This is one of the longest Easter eggs that ever got, you know, taken to solve. It took about 2 weeks for anybody to beat the map, but also it took like a week and a half to find just the first step because of how illogical and random and arbitrary it was. And they would definitely play that up as BO4 would go on. And yes, while that made it more initially fun to solve, I think we can look back from a game design perspective and that wasn't so good. Revelations is not the best map ever made, and it's not even really a new map. It's essentially a bunch of chunks from old remasters that would eventually end up being in Chronicles, but it's just a lot of old zombie stuff with maybe a new boss arena and maybe one new area in the spawn, but that's essentially it. There's a lot of new additions to the sandbox that completely broke the zombies formula. The Revelations is one of the easiest maps of all time just to purely survive in, and that is also a negative for a lot of people, but what Revelations did for the community I cannot understate, but I also won't say it's like the best zombies map ever made. It's cool, but not my favorite. Moving on, lads, next we have Nuketown Zombies in Black Ops 2, which, as far as this game goes, this is my favorite little zombies survival map, and that's for a couple of reasons. I know Nuketown can be a bit controversial, and you could look at it as a cop-out for them just to make Nuketown and throw zombies in it, but I also would like to point out that they very specifically made this map look and feel very zombies, and I oppose that to something like Alpha Omega in BO4, or even in Cold War Zombies, where you can play the onslaught mode of Nuketown. I get it's a little different, but like in BO4, the map is mostly a blackout asset, and they didn't make it feel as zombies as they could have, but there's no mistaking the fact that this is Nuketown as you remember it, sort of, but it's totally different now. It's been like absolutely overrun with zombies. The vibe and the color palette is exceptionally different, and I think that gives Nuketown a very distinct feel, which is great. And also on top of that, it's got a very difficult layout. They've altered Nuketown in the way that you can traverse it to some degree to not make it, very easy just to avoid zombies. They've blocked off certain paths, and the map design is very deliberate, and it can be a very difficult map not only because of the layout, but the perk system flying in completely random. I think this is a great map for just trying to get better at zombies because it throws you these different variables that force you to adapt. No matter how good of a player you are, you cannot completely control the outcome of your game, and that's a lot of just the randomness of the perks and everything like that. But Nuketown is great. I think it's incredibly, I hate using the word underrated, but I will say I feel Nuketown is underappreciated for what it is. I don't think it's a lazy cop-out and just slapping zombies in here. I think it's a very well thought out experience that maybe doesn't get enough love. Moving on, we have another simple survival experience, but this time in Black Ops 1, this is going to be the original map of 5, and I think it's a very different flavor of what at the time was already present in Black Ops 1. You could play Kino to Toten right on disc, but you would need to either beat the campaign on 5 or unlock it through the terminal using a secret code. And it's stuff like that, again, that added a lot of charm to BO1. It felt like almost you weren't supposed to be playing it. It was the secret. You unlocked it via the Nocturne Toten style way. And even though it has a lot of the same constituents as Kino to Toten, there are a few new added elements and mechanics, such as, the Pentagon Thief, teleportation, elevators, etc. 5 manages to be one of the most uncomfortable and anxiety-inducing maps ever made. And that really gave BO1 something different to offer. If they just had Kino to Toten and Kino 2.0 on disc, I don't think BO1 would have been nearly as well regarded as it is now. But when you think about it, Kino and 5 are made up of almost the exact same ingredients, yet they feel so totally different, which gives Black Ops 1 such incredible variety. I love 5 as a map. It's not flawless either, but I think it's an excellent experience, and I really do prefer this to Classified. There are a lot of the Chronicles remasters that I prefer to the original experience. 5 is not one of those, though, and I think that the OG is the best one to experience it in. Unforgettable map, unforgettable atmosphere, and will definitely go down as a legendary zombies map forever. Moving on, but staying on Black Ops 1, we now have the original Shangri-La, and if Ascension is this wide open map with tons of space to move around and train and all that stuff, Shangri-La is the complete opposite. This map has very little movable space, not really any comfortable areas to train like you would in Ascension, and it's just a totally opposite design philosophy from the previous map, which very much helps it feel quite different. I just love the way Black Ops 1 used creativity to have the same sandbox tools more or less, but make these totally unique feeling maps. It's something that is a little bit lost in Cold War, for example, where the maps more or less feel the same. That is completely not the case here. Monkeys from Ascension do return. I mean, they're not from Ascension, but monkeys are a factor in this map, but they have a totally different purpose now. They can steal drops and turn them into different things, including perks. So if you're really good, you can actually get yourself basically a perkaholic in the map, which is quite useful because the map is difficult. I would say it's one of the harder maps in Zombies history, mostly because of the way it's designed and its layout. Its wonder weapon's also very special. It does 0 damage, but it turns zombies into babies, and you can kick them around, and that's really about it. It's very cool. There's just so much to love about Shangri-La, and it's very enigmatic. For example, the setting of the map, we don't know if it's on Mars or on Earth. That's never really been quite nailed down. It's just shrouded in mystery and intrigue. It's great. I think this is one of the more memorable maps in BO1, and that is for good reasons. Some of them good, some of them not so good. Looking at the big picture, I would still say that Shangri-La is a pretty high tier map in the Call of Duty Zombies franchise, undoubtedly. Jumping on over to Black Ops 3 for a moment, we have Verruckt from Zombies Chronicles, and I know I criticized Nocturne Toten for its systems not really gelling well with BO3, and I still think that's kind of the case here, honestly. Like, the ability to pack a punch through gobblegum and stuff like that completely changes the flow and feel of how Verruckt used to play, either in World at War or Black Ops 1. If you're looking for it to feel exactly how it did back in the day, Chronicles Verruckt maybe does an okay job at that, but instead of looking to recreate the original, I actually think Black Ops 3's mechanics transcend what World at War did, and it ends up being something, a totally different offering than what was available back then. It's kind of hard to describe what I'm getting at, but I found myself really appreciating Chronicles Verruckt, even though I will admit that, the the map can be completely broken through gobblegums and stuff, but that's also what makes it feel very different as an offering. It's hard to put into words, but I greatly prefer it to something like Chronicles, Nacht and Toten, and I would actually happily replay Chronicles Verruckt almost any day. And I think I actually prefer it at this point to the original. There's more ways to play it, and I think it offers a bit better variety. There are no more Verruckt super sprinters here, and it's an overall more modern, balanced experience. I just think it's a ton of fun, and it has a lot to offer. Getting away from that and going to the next game in the series for a bit, we have 9 on Black Ops 4, which is another map on disc. I have very conflicted feelings about 9, because on one hand, I think it's one of the most mediocre zombies maps ever, but also on the other hand, I can see it for its very distinct qualities that make it totally separate from basically anything in the zombies catalog. I'll be the first to admit that 9 has grown on me over time. I was not the biggest fan even as of like last year, but it has grown on me very slowly. But even so, I still feel like it's never going to be a top tier zombies experience for me. It's held back by a number of things, and those include stuff like the Easter egg steps. I don't think the map design is necessarily perfect, although I think it's probably, besides Classified, the most accessible zombies map, which is a big deal for BO4 because most of the maps just simply aren't for the casual player. I believe I'd actually prefer 9 if it was made for Black Ops 3 systems. I can't help but feel that 9 was significantly held back by just the way that Black Ops 4 player mechanics were, and they had to make a lot of sacrifices in the potential of the map of what they could have done. I just would have liked to see it in BO3 personally, and I think it would have been better that way. Staying over here on Black Ops 4, fellas, we have Blood of the Dead, originally a map that I've ranked a lot lower in the past, and I still don't think it's one of the better maps out there, and it's certainly not as good as Mob of the Dead. Even though there is technically more space, the map is bigger, there's a whole other section, there's more quote-unquote content. I cannot look you in the eye and say that that content is better than what Mob of the Dead offered. There are a few things that have been removed from Mob as well, such as the Golden Gate Bridge and being able to pack a punch over there too. So Mob of the Dead has a very unique formula, and Blood of the Dead just basically tries to have the same map layout, but has none of the flow that that old map had. It plays completely differently, and I don't think that's necessarily for the better. I believe its Easter egg has one of the most emotionally impactful cutscenes of all time. I love the atmosphere of this map, but just speaking purely from a gameplay perspective for a moment, Blood of the Dead is heavily flawed, and I find myself getting very frustrated with this map at times. One of the main issues, as far as I'm concerned, is the map layout and flow is very clunky, and that's surprising given that Mob of the Dead's layout wasn't perfect, but it still had a somewhat semblance of a flow, and you could get to where you wanted to at any point, with relative ease. Not really the case in Blood of the Dead. Also, there's just weird little stuff that I cannot overlook, like the fact that the Pack-a-Punch has 3 different spawn locations in this map, but there is no indicator on where it actually is at any time, and it moves around every couple of rounds, so you just have to basically do a guessing game on where it might be, and it's very tedious to get to each side of the map, so it's a lot of just time wasting. Blood of the Dead has simultaneously some of my favorite and least favorite Easter egg steps ever made. I don't know how you can have that kind of juxtaposition in a zombies map, but it definitely averages it out to being just pretty good or okay or average or whatever. It doesn't ascend into truly great. It's not a perfect or flawless map. Far from it, in fact, even though I can appreciate some of its flaws, I also do feel like it's significantly held back from the mistakes that it does make. Coming up next, lads, we have Zetsubou No Shima, which is, it's going to end up being the lowest ranking main zombies map in BO3, not including like the Chronicles stuff. And look, the thing is, Zetsubou is heavily flawed. Even though I'll agree with you, it's a pretty good map in the overall zombies catalog, it's still the worst in BO3's main offering. But it's a bit more complicated than that because this was a necessary stumbling stone. This was Kevin Drew's first map that he really took the lead design on, and anybody designing a zombies map for the first time and being the creative lead on it is going to have some issues and some errors. But what it does show is Treyarch's ability to still take risks and, maybe even fall a little bit on their face. Cold War, I felt like overall was just consistently very average, and they had a formula, and they didn't take any big risks, honestly. Zetsubou was the complete opposite, where it was a stumbling stone, but it was also a stepping stone for better experiences down the road, and Cold War never really took that big leap. For looking at the main maps in BO3, you have the Giants, Shadows of Evil, Der Eisendrache, Zetsubou, Zetsubou, Garad, and Revelations, you could argue maybe a little bit DLC 4, but Zetsubou is the clear ugly duckling. But I don't really hold it against Zetsubou that much. I mean, being labeled as the worst map in Black Ops 3, which is the absolute home run of a game that it is still not a bad position to be in, honestly. It's like, it's still ahead of 90% of Zombies maps out there, even though it is fundamentally flawed in its own right. I can go back and play Zetsubou today and see a lot of things that like I would do differently, or things that even just Treyarch would probably do differently if made in modern day. But again, it made a lot of these mistakes, but it definitely tried to do something different, and I can commend that any day of the week. Staying on BO3, we have Kino Toten Chronicles, and you know, it's maybe a little bit of a controversial take to put the Chronicles version of this classic map higher than the original. And just from a nostalgia perspective, I can understand why people would still prefer the Black Ops 1 version, and I think it's an excellent experience in its own bubble as well, but I really just enjoy the Chronicles version and the take on how Kino is here, because I also don't think that Black Ops 3 systems completely ruined the feel and flow of the map at all. In fact, I love the visual updates to it. I love how the game still feels, and they keep a lot of the nuances that original Kino had. And not to get too caught in the weeds, but not only does it maintain everything the original Kino brought to the table, but it adds more ways to play as well. The problem with BO1 is usually the high rounds would cap out at a certain point, and you could either only ever like do a trap strat, or you know, train and do something very, very tedious. With the addition of alternate ammo types in BO3, you can play Kino a bunch of different ways. You can do the fire trap, you can train on the stage, or you can even, you know, use alternate ammo types in the alley. There's just a bunch of ways to enjoy the experience, and it makes for excellent co-op play as well. I cannot speak highly enough of the Chronicles build of Kino, and they maintained the original vision of what that map was. They didn't change it too much or too strangely, and I just overall really enjoy it. Moving on, next we have D Machine from Black Ops Cold War, the map on disc, and you could say that yes, they sold this as a remake of Nacht and Toten, but it honestly does not play like that at all. Whenever I play D Machine, I genuinely forget that Nacht and Toten is even a part of this, because there's so much new stuff going on that you totally forget that you're playing what is quote-unquote a nostalgic map. It's not the case at all, and D Machine really set the precedent for Cold War, although it is lacking in terms of side Easter eggs and other stuff to do outside of the main quest, but they managed to make survival really fun again, and it goes to show like proof of concept for what the rest of Cold War would be. I really appreciate D Machine for the map that it ended up being, even though in retrospect it missed out on a lot of potential that it could have. It doesn't reach the heights that I believe it was capable of, but they still had an excellent idea to reboot zombies in a way, and they still continued to show the map love even after the fact. The ability to upgrade the Wonder Weapon was not present in the map for like a couple of months, and that was strange enough, but the map was still incredibly playable and enjoyable even in spite of all of that. It's got a very straightforward Easter egg design, very, you know, similar to how the final Reich is set up, where it's a pretty on-the-rails quest. There was just a little more depth or other side Easter eggs and mysteries to uncover, besides maybe like one or two that are currently present in D Machine. There would have been a lot more life and replayability here, but overall, it just goes down as another classic, and I cannot give enough praise to D Machine, even though it didn't quite reach its max potential, and that's the only thing holding it back in my eyes. Moving on though to Black Ops 3, we have probably the greatest overall survival map on this game. The Giants is excellent, man. I think what this map offers is totally different to the rest of BO3. The thing is, this map has less features than your typical Black Ops 3 map, and what I mean is like there's no electric cherry, no widow's wine, no zombie shield, but that's fine, and I think it makes the experience so much better. It's one of the best overall maps just to jump in and shoot zombies, and I think it was the smartest thing to have on Black Ops 3 when it came out, because you had the more complicated, intricate, in-depth map like Shadows of Evil, and then you had its casual counterbalance as the Giant. And again, it was just a pre-order bonus, and I'm not totally sure if Treyarch understood how intelligent having both of those things were, because you would have people complain that the other map is too complex, or you could say that people would feel the Giant is too simple, but you had both going on at once, and it made for a very healthy ecosystem. It just made Black Ops 3 feels that much better, and I think it's not quite the same as Reise, even though again they are the same layout and map fundamentally at the end of the day. What they're offering you is not the same and will never be the same, but I think the Giants is one of the most revered maps in Black Ops 3, even if it is a bit underappreciated because it doesn't have all the bells and whistles like a modern round-based zombies map would, but that doesn't need to necessarily be the case. It's just a fun map to come on and shoot zombies for a bit. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, we now have the Zombies Chronicles Chronicles version of Ascension, and we've already ranked the original ones, you know, that appeared in Black Ops 1, but the reason I'm going to say that Chronicles Ascension is an overall better experience is because I think they give you far more tools to deal with everything that the map is going to throw at you. Particularly the Gobblegum helped this out a lot, and especially for solo players, this gives you an actual way to deal with the monkeys that doesn't feel like the game is cheating you out because you're not playing co-op. You unfortunately still can't do the Easter egg solo without a mod, but you do get more tools to deal with everything that Ascension provides. It still has the feel and flow and the mechanics that the original map did. The visuals have been entirely overhauled and updated, and I actually think Black Ops 3's sandbox works really well for what Ascension is offering. It's one of the more, let's just say, compatible maps with modern zombie mechanics. I think it works fantastic. I don't really have too many negatives about Ascension other than you can't do the Chronicles Easter egg solo. I feel like that should have been something they may have added, but also maybe they wanted to retain the original experience to that large of a degree, and I can also understand that, but it is a bit of a bummer for solo players. But other than that, I don't really have any complaints about Ascension. I think it's a very top tier map. While we're on the topic, we may as well talk about Shangri-La from Chronicles as well. I also prefer this to the original for so many reasons, and I think Black Ops 3's movement system, its zombie mechanics, and Gobblegum actually work well in what this map is offering as well. In order to avoid reiterating my points from Ascension, it's essentially the same argument. I just feel that Shangri-La was able to take a look at what worked about the Black Ops 1 version and still hold that charm. Like, all of the rough edges, they kind of left in the game, which is charming in a way, and they've added maybe just a couple of new things to modernize these systems, and I think that the way zombie aggression works, the AI works in here, I just feel they did a really good job of modernizing an old map without losing a lot of what made it special to begin with. That's a hard thing to do, man, and many games get it wrong, but I think Shangri-La did a great job here. But actually, kicking back over to Black Ops 1, the only BO1 map that didn't get a remaster in the Chronicles update is Call of the Dead. The reason it wasn't remastered is probably due to the fact that this was the first map in Zombies history to have a real celebrity crew. We had never seen anything like it before. Not only were the 4 playable characters celebrities, but George Romero appearing as a mini-boss, I'm sure complicated things that they wanted to do a remaster in Chronicles just wasn't going to be feasible or possible, but even so, people are playing the original Call of the Dead just as much as they were back then. And in fact, Round 100 just got broken as of like 2 weeks ago, even though this map has been out for, you know, over a decade now. And people, it was assumed impossible before. People have just figured out how to do that now, and that just goes to show the ultimate replayability that Call of the Dead has. I think its map design and its systems aren't perfect. I don't love the way George works in this map, the fact that he's completely unkillable, or I should say more accurately, he infinitely respawns, so you can never truly get rid of him, but I guess that is one of the things that make Call of the Dead so special. It has 2 ultimately very unique wonder weapons. It's got the VR-11, which turns zombies back into humans, and the Scavenger explosive sniper rifle. I feel like zombie wonder weapons have just become like big guns that just blow everything up with one pull of the trigger, but BO1 wonder weapons actually had some depth and a different purpose. Just a gun that doesn't really blow up a lot of zombies, it just turns people into humans, is so strange, and that's very Jimmy Zielinski, and I think we're missing that in modern wonder weapons, where it's like the whole point is not always just to kill zombies. Even though that's a big part of it, it's not the whole idea, and Call of the Dead really understood that. But I think it's a special map for so many reasons, and I have to rank it as a very high tier map. Going back over to Black Ops 3 is going to be Moon from Zombies Chronicles. And look, I'm just going to say it. I think I like Chronicles Moon better in just about every capacity compared to Black Ops 1. I mean, the only thing you could really say is maybe the atmosphere feels more creepy because it's so quiet and like dulled out on Moon on BO1. And I totally get that argument, but I love just the visual overhaul. I like the way the new zombies mechanics work in Black Ops 3 specifically. I think Gobblegum is unironically a good addition to this map and makes it a lot more fun to play. I just feel there's more to do in more ways you can engage with the map than just how you could in Black Ops 1. Even though it's a fantastic map on its own, I think they really took it to the next level. And it just feels that Treyarch put an extra amount of attention into making Moon specifically very special. It feels like this was a real labor of love. I just pick that up every time I play it. You can do the entire Easter egg solo. You know, it's still got both versions of it where you switch souls with the Samantha and you can take it a step further and blow up the Earth again. It's awesome. I think everything about Chronicles Moon is just about perfect, other than the fact that maybe they could have retooled the way that the excavators work, because one of the biggest problems with this map is you can't really do the Easter egg unless you get lucky with an excavator. It's like the entire Easter egg is based more or less on RNG, and that in retrospect is an element that definitely makes Moon different, but I cannot say is the most cohesive to modern gaming. It's got problems, and you can tell a lot of them are of archaic nature, but that's, I guess, just the growing pains of what Moon was, and even just what Zombies was all those years ago. But I love Chronicles Moon, I love everything about it, and it's a high tier map for me, no questions asked. All right, so next we have the final map in Black Ops 4, which is easily the best map in the whole game, in my opinion, and is genuinely fantastic. This is Ancient Evil, and I truly think if this had Black Ops 3 systems, it could have been one of the greatest Zombies maps ever made, period. I've always liked Ancient Evil, but my opinion of it over time has only grown more fond, and I'm not sure exactly why that is. It's not that every map in BO4 has grown on me. Some of I feel like I've even gotten worse about, but Ancient Evil is not that case at all. One of the only faults I can give it is I don't think its boss fight is necessarily the best. I feel that has room for improvement, but the Easter egg design is genuinely masterclass. It's Treyarch at its best. Its vibe and atmosphere and aesthetic is unmatched, and even though as a community I think it's fair to say we've gotten a little bit bored of the 4 wonder weapon formula, I feel Ancient Evil does it with its gauntlets in a way that brings something brand new to the table. Using the hands and powers of these gods is something unlike anything else. It's probably just as, groundbreaking as when we got the staves. Okay, maybe not quite as much as that, but what I appreciate is we had this wonder weapon formula where but you can get the originals, you can upgrade them into the redeemed hands, but then you can upgrade them a third time into the exalted hands. We've never seen this kind of like tiered upgrade system for the wonder weapons that was this in depth. Granted, the exalted hands were honestly not much different from just the regular upgraded ones, which felt like a bit of a wasted opportunity in hindsight, but the just juxtaposition of the overworld and underworld in Ancient Evil, the vibe and atmosphere it cannot be topped. It's probably one of my favorite settings ever. I just wish the gameplay was maybe a little bit more tight here, and that's mostly to do with wishing that it was on Black Ops 3 systems. That's the only fault I can really give it, but it's such an excellent Zombies map and highly advised playing. I think it's the best on BO4. Moving on also to our final Cold War map as well, we have Toten, and dude, I don't know what it is exactly. I've been struggling to put my finger on it precisely, but I just love this map, and I think this is Cold War's best offering. Even though I love D-Machine, and basically I think that it has a, very solid average, there's no bad map in Cold War. Toten is the one that for me, sticks out the most. I feel it has the most personality, the best main quest design, the most fun wonder weapons, and I think it took the most chances as well. And it seems almost everything paid off. I love the boss fight. The addition of Klaus is phenomenal. It's just everything about it. As soon as you start playing the main quest, the intensity and the energy and pacing of this map is just literally brilliant. It never really lets up. There's no dull moments. You start playing and you do some like crazy things throughout the quest that are genuinely unforgettable. I'm not sure why I have such a soft spot for Toten. I just think that it gets a lot right, and this was Cold War finding itself as far as its main Easter egg goes. I truly think if we had a map that was as well designed quality as Toten and had just as many side Easter eggs as Forsaken does, it would have been a actual like top tier Zombies map of all time. I also feel it does the most to separate itself from the rest of Cold War maps, despite them having the setback of having, essentially the exact same sandbox. That was a problem, and I think Toten did a lot to alleviate it. Maybe not totally, but they did a good job, and a lot of passion and effort went into this map, and I love it personally. So moving on to our next map, we have Riese from World at War, and I would also say the Black Ops 1 version, even though I'm not exactly including that in this particular list, but the maps play more or less the same between those two games. But the thing with Riese is I can play it now and still have just as much fun playing it as I did back then, and I truly think this was the pinnacle of innovation for Zombies at the time. What this did was introduce the ability to pack-a-punch, thus furthering the progression that the player would have match to match completely. Like, it exponentially changed the game and opened avenues for totally different, directions for Zombies to go in, not only with its weapons, but also just the way that the game would progress. It's no secret that Riese is incredibly simplistic by today's standards. There's no main Easter egg or really anything else substantial to do outside of merely surviving, but that's fine. The way that you would find different creative methods to survive with your friends was what made this map so iconic. It gave you the most player agency and replayability, and I think fundamentally that's what makes Riese Derice, almost a perfect map for me, is the amount of replayability that is baked into this experience. It's so good. You can argue that Kino, Toten, and Derice are just essentially the same thing. There's almost no differences between those two maps. They've got the same components, but I don't know, just the way that it's laid out in Derice and the way that the experience comes together, perhaps it's nostalgia speaking, but I think Derice is fantastic. Obviously, it has some flaws. The World at War version using the Wunderwaffe would completely eliminate the effect of your Juggernog, which was, you know, a weird oversight that I'm not sure how even got past testing, but man, I love Derice, and I could talk about this for hours, but I won't. Now, getting to our final map in Infinite Warfare is the map on disc, Zombies in Spaceland. And if you're noticing a trend, you're going to realize that a lot of the map on disc for Zombies ends up being the best out of the whole season. Of course, that's not always the case, but for a lot of the non-Treyarch experiences, you realize that the map that it comes out with is clearly the one they put the most time, energy, and love into. And the DLCs can kind of be all over the place from a quality perspective, but Zombies in Spaceland not only kills it in the quality department, but it's also just overflowing with personality as well, making for a truly one-of-a-kind Zombies experience. It's in this 1980s like theme park, and just that setting alone, you know, has some unbelievable potential. They've got the celebrity cast going on. You have David Hasselhoff in this map, and not to mention, I actually think Spaceland has a top 5 Zombies boss fight of all time. Like, even against the aliens, this boss fight did have to be nerfed shortly after the game released, but even now, I think it's in almost a perfect balanced state. It's very challenging, but it's so incredibly rewarding to get good at. I think an underappreciated element of Spaceland, honestly, is the fact that it's laid out like Derice, where you have its central hub with Pack-a-Punch and you have these sprouting areas, but the way that these maps flow together, or these certain subsections work together, is great. Like, that's so underutilized. It's got an excellent map flow. I just have to say, Zombies in Spaceland start to finish is a very dialed in experience, and it almost doesn't even matter what you're doing. You can be high rounding, you can be speedrunning the Easter egg, or just playing it casually with friends, and no matter what, you're gonna have a great time. There's something for everybody to do, and it's varied for all different kinds of play, which is the sign of a remarkable Zombies map. There's no doubt about it that Spaceland is easily the best that IW has to offer in terms of just sheer map design, and if this map had the Mephistopheles boss fight, I think Lee Ross would quite literally ascend into godhood. Moving on over to Black Ops 2, we have a fan favorite and all-time classic, Buried. Now, here's the thing. I tend to criticize maps that give you, like, way too many tools that will make the map too easy or overpowered or, you know, whatever. Things that let the player power just get totally out of hand. Revelations is a great example of that, where the map becomes so easy that it's almost boring. And that could be the case here, and sometimes is with Buried. However, I feel there's a lot more going on under the surface that prevents you from slipping into just one very easy kind of mindless play style. The way that Buried is laid out, and its sandbox elements being in somewhat random locations, but also just the variance of the buildables you have, as well as the wonder weapons, it becomes so open-ended that yes, you can get to a point where you're overpowered and the game is incredibly easy, but it also makes the fact of having all of these tools at your access engaging in its own right, and I think that's great. Not only that, but to mention that this is the first map to have a super Easter egg, where if you've completed every map beforehand, you can do this ultimate ending, either for Maxis or Richthofen, a completely new innovation to Zombies that we've never really seen in the same capacity, even though it's one of the most grandiose things you can do in the Zombies mode. I really feel like that's a missed opportunity to continue on something like that, but Buried introduced it and I think executed it almost flawlessly. There's almost nothing I dislike about the Easter eggs themselves. I just feel Buried is a very different kind of feeling map, especially compared to what else you have in Black Ops 2, like Mob of the Dead or even Origins. They're very different, but that's the spice, that's the variety that Black Ops 2 had to offer. Not every map felt the same. In fact, they're almost totally different games map to map, which is pretty insane, and I don't think we're going to get that kind of design just because, you know, the creative directors of those respective maps are two very different people with different ideas of what Zombies should be. But that's what made Black Ops 2 for everybody, in my opinion, and Buried is something that is incredibly niche and I think works well for many of us. So getting to our final Chronicles map is going to be Origins, and you'll notice I haven't ranked the original, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I think Chronicles Origins is not the exact same experience as the original, and it's slightly inferior for a few reasons I'll get to later, but by and large, I think that Origins as a map, whether you're talking about the BO2 or BO3 version, works well in either system. Black Ops 3's, with its movement and its gobblegums, is actually a feature that doesn't feel too out of place in this map like it does in, say, Nacht and Toten, where that's like a really hard shift and juxtaposition. You don't really have that in Origins Chronicles. Now, I'm not going to go into detail why I think Origins is one of the greatest maps of all time. I mean, that should be no shocker to anybody, but I'm going to say that for when I get to the actual original version of the map. But needless to say, I think Black Ops 3 seems to work pretty well with what Origins was originally going for, and I like the experience a lot here. Hey guys, real quick, before we get into our top 5 here, I just want to let you know that I'm doing a brand new podcast with my wonderful co-host T-Dog, and it's called Going Dark. This podcast centers on everything Call of Duty. It's not something about, you know, the CDL or competitive COD. We're talking about all things, maybe zombies, multiplayer, Warzone, campaigns, whatever it is. We've got a really cool thing going on here with this podcast. A lot of you guys have supported it, and it's blown our expectations out of the water. It's been insane. So thank you all for that, and you guys can go check it out at the end of this video or whatever. It'll be linked in the description, or it's just called the Going Dark Podcast. Go and give it a watch and let me know what you think about it. I appreciate everybody supporting it, and let's continue. Alright guys, we've cracked our top 5, and I think it would be a crime against humanity if Gorod Krovi on Black Ops 3 didn't make somewhere on this list. This, I think, is one of the best Black Ops 3 maps, even though it isn't quite at the top. BO3 has some hard hitters. I think we can agree that this was essentially the peak of Zombies map design, and there's almost no doubting that. I've always said that Gorod Krovi was the perfection of the Reese formula as far as layout goes. I absolutely love everything about the Easter egg here. There's not a single step that I ultimately dislike. I think the boss fight is phenomenal and fantastic. It's a bit of a subversion of who you think the boss is going to be, and it's unexpected in ways that are pleasant and still quite predictable in ways that feel, you know, that they're still in touch with what makes Zombies excellent. I cannot give enough praise to Gorod Krovi. There's almost nothing that I inherently dislike about the map. I think the Wonder Weapon is unique and fantastic and definitely fits the setting. I like the idea of, you know, recontextualizing the Origins robots for different purposes here. The PPSH returns. I mean, there's so many things that make this map charming to me, and it feels like a real love letter to the community in some sense. It's an outstanding map on every marker I can think of. Coming up right after that, ladies and gentlemen, we have the absolute classic Mob of the Dead. This is Jason Blundell's first spearheaded map in Black Ops 2, and fundamentally the map that can be credited for saving the direction of BO2 Zombies, as it were, and honestly changing the formula of what Call of Duty Zombies would be from here on out. Mob of the Dead is a great map for so many reasons. It is a very small but tight design. They weren't able to do all of Alcatraz like they wanted, and the Easter egg design is very deliberate. The entire map progression is very different to how Jimmy Zielinski would set up a map, where it was more or less an open sandbox where you kind of do whatever you want. This has a very deliberate pathway in which you're supposed to progress through the map, and for the time, that was very different for Zombies. It felt like an actual story was being played. It almost felt like more sort of like a campaign mission, and that was new to the palette for us, and it's done in a way where it's oozing with atmosphere and energy. Like, you cannot beat the setting and the vibe and tone of this. Even Blood of the Dead doesn't quite strike at the heart that Mob of the Dead was able to accomplish. Part of that is due to the celebrity cast that Mob would have, and Blood of the Dead would not feature, obviously, but there's so many charming little things to Mob, and it's an experience with so much passion and love. It's become a fan favorite instantly for a reason, and is still one of the greatest maps to have ever be conceived. My girlfriend and I went to Alcatraz in real life last year, and I made zombie references the whole time, and I'll admit that there was no shame in that. You know, this map has had such an impact on me because not only is it just fundamentally a fantastic map, but it did so many unspeakable things for Zombies that we cannot comprehend all in one video. You could say a shortcoming of Mob of the Dead is that the Easter egg is very short and there's not much to it, and maybe fair enough, but also it's short and sweet and to the point. It's not over bloated, or they're not doing too much. Like, it's a very repeatable and good experience to have. It's a great quest design, and man, Mob of the Dead, I could go on for hours, but I won't. Up next, we've got the classic, the other Jason Blundell map in BO2 that was just as impactful as Mob, and for similar reasons, but this is the original version of Origins. Again, we talked about Chronicles, but the original OG Origins in BO2 had something really special going for it, and you could talk about the beauty in its addition of the 4 Wonder Weapon formula. This is the first time we ever saw that. You could talk about its Easter egg quest design, its map layout, etc. Not only is there a lot to do in this map, but it's all very well articulated and thought out. There are maybe a couple flaws in the map's design in terms of like how you get around, and sure, maybe that is definitely worth nitpicking, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. The reason why I think this strikes a chord with people, besides just being a innovative and excellent map in every capacity, is this truly does visually represent what Zombies as a mode is. You know, you spawn in and you have the really gritty and monotonous gray trenches of, you know, the battlefields of World War I, which in some sense represents the monotonous gameplay that Zombies can be. be just the typical boarding up barriers and surviving, you know, that kind of repetitive gameplay. It almost represents that, and then you have the crazy place or the underground area that represents that second layer that Zombies always has, that intrigue, that mystery, the Easter eggs, and so on. There's always something else going on under the surface in every Zombies map, and I think that's visually better represented by no other map than Origins. I think it nails it in that regard. I think this stunned us for so many reasons, and it was a map that we were not quite ready for as a community when it released. This more or less has the structure of a BO3 map, which would be representative of what we got in their next game, and I think they took that formula and innovated on it even further, which we'll get to. I'm gonna be honest, Origins took a lot of risks in its story, in its gameplay elements and everything, and most of them paid off. Some of them did not, but this was the reintroduction of our original cast, albeit somewhat different. The introduction of the premise crew, which we would play with for the most of Black Ops 3, was, you know, revitalized here. That was enough to get people excited and get their foot in the door again, and I truly don't think we've ever had a better DLC format to end off the season like Origins did. Obviously, the cutscene was a bit controversial, you know, based on where the story was going from there. It ended up making sense by Black Ops 3, more or less, but I think this was a way to end off a zombie season. We've never had a DLC 4 that's really hit quite as hard as Origins did. That was just so different for a map, and I love the risks that it took, and once again, not all of them paid off. Origins does have some sloppy moments here and there, and things that could be refined that they actually didn't really do much about in Chronicles, but there would be another version of a map that's kind of similar in this as far as formula goes that I actually think perfected it. That being said, I still have a lot of gratitude for Origins to be that pioneer. It was the one that did it first. Ladies and gentlemen, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the great Der Eisendrache in Black Ops 3. DLC 1 came out absolutely swinging, and the reason I feel that this is sort of a perfection on the Origins formula has mostly to do with the Easter egg quest design and the way that the wonder weapons are. Obviously, Origins introduced the staffs, and the bows and DE are a clear inspiration from what Origins did. Now, where they differ is that Origins was never really meant to be played or beaten solo. I mean, again, you can play the map, but the Easter egg was never meant to be beaten solo. People figured out a way to do it, but obviously one of the biggest setbacks of Origins is you have to do all the staffs to do that quest. DE said, hey, we can still have this formula, but you only need to do a certain amount of bows of whoever's in your game. So if you're playing solo, you just got to do one bow, and I think the quests for each individual bow are unique, they're fun to do, and they make a lot of sense. It's a smooth gameplay experience, and everything about DE is refined. I don't think I can find a single flaw in something that I would correct, really. I mean, I think there are missed opportunities, but I don't think there's that many flaws in DE's logic or its design. I've said this before too, but I think DE is the closest thing you can get to a perfect Zombies map. Obviously, that will never exist, and there are some nitpicks that I could say about DE, but it is truly the closest thing you'll get to a perfect experience. That's to say that, you know, it's maybe not as risk-takey as Origins did, and I give it a lot of props for that, but it's so refined, and it's like Zombies at its core. DE also can be credited for the real first three-phase boss fight. Like, that became the formula for Zombies from here on out, essentially. Shadows of Evil has a boss fight, but it's not really the same. It's more just like a final step. DE has an actual three-phase fight where you're, you know, going against an enemy, and that would, you know, be in Zombies maps from here on out for a really, really long time, and is still somewhat, you know, looked at as a design feature now, where we expect boss fights at the end of each Zombies map. That really started in DE, and that absolutely blew it out of the water. It's a great fight, albeit not the most complex one we've ever seen, but it was their first real attempt at something like this, and they did great. Der Eisendrache, for so many reasons, is near perfection, and I cannot state that enough. So, ladies and gentlemen, finally coming in at the best Zombies map ever in history is still Shadows of Evil. This is my GOAT, and I could talk about for 7.5 hours why Shadows of Evil is the greatest map of all time. I could talk your ear off why this is genuinely the greatest Zombies experience to ever grace planet Earth. I will try to keep it relatively condensed, though. The thing is, it has the absolute perfect balance of a, you know, casual experience and an extremely hardcore experience at the same time. I tend to think that Shadows of Evil has the deliberate progression pathway that Mob of the Dead did so well, and even innovates on that formula and does it better, and it still retains the sandbox open-ended freeform kind of gameplay that something like DE or Origins or Buried has. It's this beautiful blend of both on-the-rails gameplay and open-ended structure that you can play essentially however you want. There has never been a Zombies map that is this flexible in how the player can engage with it. While I'll admit it's not quite as casual as something like Kino or Toten, I still remember it being mostly casual friendly when Black Ops 3 was out, and even now in 2024, people are still pushing this map and trying to beat its speedrun world record. That just shows how much depth there is to this game, how much people are optimizing it and care about this map overall. I think this had the most impact on me when it came out. And the thing is, I feel we were not ready for Shadows of Evil when it came out, and we really did age into this map as the season would go on. It introduced a lot of new concepts that were at the time quite uncomfortable, but we became much more familiar with them as Black Ops 3 would go on, and we can look back in retrospect and see this was truly an artistic piece and the culmination of all of Treyarch's learned lessons from the long history of zombies up to that point. The thing is, at this point, I truly don't feel there will ever be a zombies map that will surpass this. The absolute genius and the stride that they were in at Treyarch there will never be matched again. The thing is, in a run, we got Origins, Shadows of Evil, and Der Eisendrache all back to back. When you think about that, it's legitimately insane. I don't think we're ever going to see a crazy run like that in zombies ever again. Those are arguably some of the best maps ever made, and they came out around the same time, which indicates that they really had something magical and they had it together at that point. And, you know, things are just a lot different now, and I'm not totally sure we would ever see something that quite beats the magic of Shadows of Evil. However, I will confidently say I think Shadows of Evil is going to be my favorite map of all time forever. I don't see that ever changing. This video has been a culmination of my experience in Call of Duty Zombies for almost 20 years at this point. Whether you agreed or disagreed with my analysis, I really thank you for taking the time to watch this regardless. If you don't mind leaving a like, that would be great. Subscribe if you are new to the channel, and go check out the podcast if you haven't already. But thank you all for watching and making it this far in the video. You are a genuine legend, and hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.